Nashville's Morning News with Dan Mandis.
And so, my fellow Americans,
We talk news. Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
6:07 Nashville's Morning News on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Good morning to you, friends, and welcome on in to Thursday, May 2nd. How are you? Along with Johnny B, Ken Weaver, Dan Mandis here. Indeed, did you see what happened in Tuscaloosa yesterday? So this went viral. You've got pro-Israel protesters, you've got anti-Israel protesters, and they can all agree on one thing. Yeah, they're both F. Joe Bidening. And they're like yelling at each other across the street, and they're all chanting the same thing, FJB. I thought it was kind of funny. I'm trying to make sure that wasn't, some sort of artificial intelligence thing, but it does look real. And that was one of many viral moments that we have seen coming from the various battles over the encampments across America. I want to say hello and good morning to Jonathan Fahey. Jonathan, appreciate you being here on Super Talk 99.7. You, of course, at one time worked in the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, served as director of ICE for a time, former federal prosecutor as well. And you've been on Fox News many times. Jonathan, let me ask you, first off, we're going to talk about, immigration and a few things, but I'm watching as the UCLA encampment is beginning to fall. We know that a bunch of folks out at Columbia were also arrested. What kind of charges, as a former federal prosecutor, you must know, what kind of charges will they bring some of these protesters up on?
Well, it would seem like the types of things, and these are would be state crimes, but it would be things like probably trespassing, disorderly conduct, things of that nature, probably misdemeanor level charges. And my suspicion is even places where they're getting arrested, if there's New York or LA, these charges are probably going to be dropped against these individuals, unfortunately, but it'll be misdemeanor level charges. But it is good to be arresting them. You don't have a right to, you have a right to protest, but you certainly don't have a right to set up and set up camp in a university or anywhere else without permission, and they certainly didn't do that. So it's good that they finally are starting to arrest them. And you see the places like Florida that dealt with it at the beginning, and they don't have the same problems. So it's funny how the left kind of creates their own problems, and they let them manifest, and they get worse. Well,
and see, that's the thing, and we were talking about that earlier, where you do allow this nonsense to go on and on and on, and then you have situations like this where police have to go in, put themselves at risk, and put everybody else at risk as well, trying to break down this encampment. And I love what Florida did, where you just say, okay, we're going to nip this stuff right in the bud, and you're not allowed to do this. And so we'll continue to update folks on the breakdown of the UCLA encampment, which is literally happening right now. Sort of related to this, yesterday, word came from a number of different sources that President Biden was thinking about bringing in Palestinian refugees. Now, if you missed my monologue on this yesterday, folks, you know that by and large, most of the people there in Gaza, they are anti-Israel, clearly, also very anti-American. Some 75% or so of the people in Gaza actually agree with Hamas and thought that, the raid on the terrorist attack on October 7th was actually a victory for Hamas and for Gaza. And now the president apparently thinking this would be a good idea to bring some of these folks here. Let me ask you, Jonathan Fahey, can he actually do that? Is there any way to prevent him from doing that?
I don't think there's any way to prevent him from doing that. I think, what they've been doing, they've been ignoring immigration laws all the way from the beginning of this administration. They campaigned on ignoring the immigration law. So if you'll parole them in as refugees or something like that. And it's funny when you talk about the story because it's so shocking. I think it was originally a CBS report, and Brett Baer from Fox News was reading it on air and had to do a double take because it almost seems so absurd. But if you think about this administration, this is exactly what they've been doing all along. They've never once put the safety and security of the American people ahead of their political agenda. And this is just so typical of the Biden administration. I want to come on and say, this is unbelievable or this is shocking. It's like, it really isn't, because, President Biden, there's really no core values. He's trying to be on both sides of this issue. So he's trying to, we'll bring these refugees in. And I think your point is great when it's like 75% support of these attacks. And can you imagine an American president having a 75% approval rating? That would be, probably the most popular president ever. I think George H.W. Bush had that for a brief moment after, the first Gulf War. But other than that, it's really astonishing. And a lot of us that remember after 9/11, the celebrations in the streets of Gaza, just wildly celebrated the 9/11 attacks in the United States. But President Biden is going to, I think they're not just thinking about doing it. I think they're going to do it because they see a political benefit. They have to appease the left somehow. So they're going to, and what the trick they're going to use is they're going to, discount these polls and say, oh, the people of Gaza are basically completely separated from this leadership and they don't support it, so they're the victims also, which again, the polls have not indicated this. And the other thing that I read or saw somewhere is they talked about how they'll vet these people, and we know that's patently false. I mean, how do you vet somebody coming from Gaza? How do you how do you get a record? How do you get anything? It's utter nonsense, to use your word from earlier, but they just don't care about national security. They don't care about public safety. You saw that with Lake and Riley. Their main issue is, one, appeasing the far left, and two, having as many immigrants in this country as possible because they see it as an electoral advantage to them.
Well, and it's interesting, too, Jonathan Fahey joining us. I saw a story the other day. Biden and Mexico's president, Obrador, plan to clamp down on illegal immigration at the southern border. That was actually a headline. Election season clearly, obviously, is here, as you just mentioned. Obviously, as well, it seems like the barn door has been left way open as well. I think that what they're trying to do is find anything that will impact the election, including lying about their plans for the border.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Certainly lying is the core of what they've been doing on this whole thing. But yeah, you're right. They're going to do something, probably in cooperation with Mexico, to get the numbers down, and they could announce maybe some new plan and say, look, our new plan is working and we're serious and we need immigration reform and we're going to do it. But everyone knows, or everyone should know, based on the first 3 and almost 3.5 years of this administration, their policy is open borders. And if he gets reelected, does anyone think it's going to be anything other than worse? The border is going to be completely open. It will be essentially an unofficial surrender to the Sinaloa cartel down there. And it is, and this idea that we would need cooperation or whatever, they know how to shut the border, reinstitute remain in Mexico, start enforcing the current laws, bring back Title 42. This thing could end or largely end overnight, but they won't do it. It's all games. And remember from the beginning of the administration, before they removed Kamala Harris from all official duties when she was the border czar, that, they talked about the root causes and all this other nonsense, because that's what they do. That's sort of the left-wing move, is anything that they don't want to solve or they want to have happen. And in this case, they try to act like the situation is just so overly complicated. You need to get debit cards to Honduras and broadband and all this other nonsense before you can address the border issue. But yeah, it's going to continue, and it will get even worse if there is a second term.
All right, Jonathan Fahey, thank you very much for joining us here on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. And